So I have people asking me what's going on in Afghanistan. It's a really good question. There's no simple answer. There's a lot of things happening. There's a lot of things that we're just going to have to wait and see. But there's a couple of scenarios that I think we should keep our eyes and our minds open to. The first scenario is maybe the one that everyone kind of assumes they're witnessing right now, and that is the humiliating eviction of the United States from Afghanistan. Now, some people have said, Brian, you said the US was going to stay in Afghanistan. They were going to control the green zone in the international airport. They were going to maintain 1,000 US troops there. Well, I didn't say that. The US said they were going to do that. Of course, if things changed on the ground and made that impossible, then of course they were going to be evicted, just like in Vietnam in 1975. They had all kinds of plans, at least on paper, of how they were going to back the client regime they installed into power in southern Vietnam. Now that said, of the Western media saying things like, how did the Taliban take over so quickly? Or how come the Afghan government collapsed so quickly? The Taliban had nothing to take over. There was nothing about the Afghan government to collapse in the first place. It was always a hollow facade. And to illustrate this, all you need to do is go to these reports that have been put out for many years. Special Inspector General for Afghanistan Reconstruction. This one is dated July 30th, 2021, so probably the most recent one. And what is the picture that they picked that to symbolize U.S. reconstruction efforts in Afghanistan? It's this picture of a crumbling, damaged concrete barrier with ad hoc generators and lighting in the background, and 3 members of Afghanistan's security forces, I'm assuming, wearing mismatching, incomplete uniforms. This is what they have to show after 2 decades of so-called reconstruction in Afghanistan. And don't judge a book by its cover. Go through the report and see if it's borne out in the actual report, and you'll see that yes, it is. There's no mention of any real infrastructure projects in this report. And I've read a couple of these over the years, and it's the same story no matter which year you're looking at. They're talking about corrupt contractors, just basically stealing money, never meeting their targets, nothing being accomplished, the project falling apart immediately after it was completed. In this particular report, they make mention of how the Afghan government that the US has been propping up for 20 years cannot even be trusted to manage fuel supplies across the country. The US has to do that for them. When you're looking through this, you realize that it is just a hollow facade, and that the moment the US cut its support for this client regime and everything that they were doing in Afghanistan, it would vaporize practically overnight. There really was nothing for the Taliban to overthrow. Even the military that the US was propping up, if you look at it, even on paper, it was not designed to survive without constant US military support. And I just did a video about how US empire works today in the 21st century, how they use their military force to crush governments, and how they have the admin force to kind of build over and control that country after it's been taken over. And how do they do that? They do that through USAID. And USAID says they are a development fund, but what they're really doing is just getting people hooked on US handouts, getting them dependent on the US and whatever client regime they install into power. So that's why it all collapsed overnight, because there was nothing, they didn't build anything there. This was all an exercise in control. Imperialism throughout human history has been about creating dependent colonies, or in the 21st century, client regimes. So under the first scenario, the US was trying to maintain this status quo in Afghanistan, and things changed on the ground where they were just physically forced out of the country. That's one possibility. The other possibility is that the US is kind of letting the Taliban take over on purpose. This isn't without precedent. You know, they had technically withdrawn from Iraq in 2011. They just had a contingent force and the embassy, the massive embassy there in Baghdad. But then when this so-called Islamic State came along, it justified a surge back into the country. And then that surge wasn't just about the US putting forces on the ground in Iraq to deal with Baghdad and Tehran's growing relationship with each other, but ISIS just coincidentally crossed over into Syria. And so the US was able to justify invading and occupying Syria to allegedly combat ISIS. Something very similar could be happening in Afghanistan. Now, the US might surge back into the country. That's one possibility. Maybe not immediately, but maybe in 2 or 3 years' time. Or the US is exercising a certain amount of influence over the Taliban. You're asking, how could that be? How could that possibly be? The Taliban has a very close relationship with Qatar and Saudi Arabia. The Taliban opened an office in 2013 in Qatar. They did that because they were trying to negotiate a political settlement in Afghanistan. It's an Al Jazeera camera crew following the Taliban around right now in Afghanistan. So we have to be very careful about that, because the US launders its influence over groups like the Taliban through Saudi Arabia and Qatar, because Saudi Arabia and Qatar are obviously very overtly partners with the US in just about everything. And we watched Saudi Arabia and Qatar, along with the US and Turkey, build up the Islamic State, Al-Qaeda, Al-Nusra, the Libyan Islamic fighting group in Libya. We watched them set these extremist groups up and manipulate entire regions of the planet with them. Could they be doing that again with the Taliban? We have to wait and see. Maybe they'll influence certain factions within the Taliban, or maybe groups that are opposed to the Taliban. In Afghanistan, they will use these groups to help establish safe havens for extremist groups to carry out attacks across the region. Look at a map. Afghanistan borders China, Pakistan, Iran, and all of these former Soviet territories. It's no secret that the US is pursuing a campaign of encircling Russia, China, and Iran. And if you think about it, Afghanistan is like the chain link linking all of these geopolitical encirclement strategies together. And so it's very unlikely that the US would just abandon Afghanistan with no backup plan or no plan B or no attempt to reassert themselves over Afghanistan. It's very unlikely. And if that is the case, then that really does mean that the US empire is collapsing, irreversibly collapsing and contracting from the global stage. But think about it. The US withdrawing like this, especially with these humiliating scenes of panic and rushing to get out of the country and abandoning their allies, it could actually become an asset. Think about it. They're leaving Afghanistan if they want to set up extremist groups in Afghanistan to attack China or Pakistan or Iran. It would give them so much more plausible deniability, because then when people say the US is behind the East Turkestan Islamic movement, staging attacks from Afghanistan into Xinjiang, China, the US can just say, we left Afghanistan. What are you talking about? We left Afghanistan. Not only did we leave Afghanistan, but we suffered immense humiliation. How could we still be influencing anything inside of Afghanistan? The Taliban run the country and they hate us. They spent 20 years fighting us. It would be a mistake for me to say I knew what was going to happen next. Instead, what I'm going to say is look at these two possible scenarios. There might be additional ones. If you can think of one, put it in the comment section below. Let's have a discussion about this, because we really don't know for sure what's going to happen next. I think the main takeaway I want to have for this video is for people to just keep their eyes open and keep their minds open to what might happen next, and to understand why Afghanistan was significant, why this might look like a complete failure, but honestly, from the very beginning, the US never planned to create a strong, independent government that would survive a US withdrawal. They knew that was never going to happen. That was never a goal, so when the government collapsed, that wasn't a US policy failure. They never intended for that government to survive. So we got to figure out what the US did intend to happen when they withdrew from Afghanistan, and how they might try to take what looks like a humiliating defeat and actually use it as an asset for what could be a much wider covert campaign to use Afghanistan as a springboard to destabilize the region. If you thought this video was useful, please like and share it. Think about subscribing. It's free to do and it helps the channel grow. You could also hit the notification icon to get updates when I put up a new video. Check out the video description. Check out these reports about U.S. Reconstruction. You will see what a hollow facade U.S. Reconstruction efforts were in Afghanistan for the last 20 years. There's also ways in the video description to help support my work, like by becoming a Patreon member. To everyone helping support my work, whether it's through one-time donations or through Patreon, thank you so much. It's what makes this work possible. And as always, thank you for watching.